Well, that was really anticlimactic. I'm off. No, so thanks for coming. This is not the last talk of the day, but I've been kind of stressing about this all day because it's a lot of research that I've been doing, and usually I stand up and just rant, whereas this is a lot of content that I've been researching for the last 18 months. So the title is Fuck Around, Get Found Out, Disinformation as a Service, but what most people know it as is HoneyPOC. There are a few Easter eggs throughout the talk, so if you can read the text at the top, you can just have a little bit of a try. For those of you who don't know me, most people in the room do, but as this is being recorded, my name is Andy Gill. I'm known as Zephyrfish on most platforms. I'm the UK lead and principal consultant at Lares Consulting. This is our logo. I've mainly focused on red and purple theming with more of a kind of offensive nature side of things. I'm also an insomniac, so most of my productivity happens between 11 o'clock at night to 6, 7, 8, 9 in the morning, and then I need to get up at 9:30, so it's not ideal. Outside of security, I do quite a lot of photography. I love taking pictures of Scotland. It's probably one of the most beautiful countries in the world. I really enjoy driving when my car works. It's kind of a bit broken at the moment. I do karate. I'm my first Dan black belt in karate, so not only a keyboard ninja, I'll also break your legs. So, anyway. I'm also co-host of a podcast called WouijaCast, which is very not safe for work. It's myself and one of my good friends, Dave. We speak to people in the industry about how they got into industry and what they're doing right now and what their path was. And we're on about 24, 25 episodes. So the last episode we had was Cyber Gibbons, which was very not safe for work, but it's very worth a shot. And if you want to follow my photography, it's Zephyr Snaps on Twitter. So anyway, into the actual talk. The original project was started in July last year. So round about, I think it was like the 18th or the 19th of July, 2020, there was a vulnerability, and there's always vulnerabilities that come out, but there was a vulnerability called SIGRED, which was being hyped up, because there's a Windows vulnerability that affected DNS and could trigger remote code execution. And I was having a discussion with some of my colleagues at the time about how long would it be until a proof of concept came out? Because often people hype these things up and then a proof of concept is never released. So I was like, I'll make a POC. What's the worst that could happen? So I didn't know what the vulnerability was, but I made a bash script that would make a curl request to Rick Astley's video, and it would pull down the video and rickroll people. And it was designed purely for a bit of fun to kind of play a trick on people and kind of highlight that you should read things before you run them. And that started getting a lot of traction really quickly. So it was around about 8 o'clock at night that this happened. I think the announcement was like West Coast America time. So it was like around about lunchtime, West Coast America. And by about 8:30, so half an hour in, it was getting about 100 hits a second. So it was getting a lot of hits. People just running things going, oh, this is fine. And one of my good friends, might be in the audience, John Carroll, recommended that I go and look at Think's Canary. Think's Canary have this service called Canary Tokens, where you can generate a URL or a binary or lots of other different kind of mediums, in that when the request is sent to that URL, it will trigger an email and be like, this is the source IP, this is the geographic location of that IP, and this is a little bit of information about what was run. So I baked that in, and I built a Windows binary, and I built a bash script, and I uploaded those, and a lot of people ran it. So everyone loves a nice graph. This is essentially the information from the first POC. There was a lot of interest from the States, and that was mostly because the vulnerability came out around about lunchtime in the States, so people were online checking things out. And second in command there is China. A lot of interest came from actors, script kiddies, general researchers. I put researchers in massive inverted quotes because we'll get onto later on as to why that's total nonsense. And they were interested in it. So this was around 2,000-3,000 IPs. It wasn't a lot, but it was quite a lot. And the kind of lasting impact of that was that there was a lot of distrust in raw proofs of concept that are being uploaded. And as a result, most of my colleagues don't trust anything that I put in Slack now. I'm like, oh, check this out. And they're like, no, Andy, not clicking on that. Last time I clicked on that, I got rickrolled. I'm like, well, you see, that's just one of these things that happens. And what it also did is it built a lot of mistrust and misinformation in threat intelligence feeds. And I say threat intelligence feeds because a lot of people were taking what was my HoneyPOC and just chucking it to anyone, going, oh, look at this legitimate POC that's come out, it's really cool, not checking what the code did, and as a result, lots of people clicked on it. And the kind of lasting impact of that is it makes folks a little bit safer, because people were more aware of what they were clicking on and what they were running. Well, we say that. They were meant to be. So it prevented kind of skids, so script kiddies, or as Alex said earlier, script people, which is a bit more collective, running proofs of concept, download them, and etc. What it also did in the first instance, and I'm going to talk about kind of the more broad aspect a bit later on, is it kind of identified foreign threat actors. And I mean, doing red teaming, I don't really get involved too much in the threat intelligence side of things, but I do deal with kind of digestion of bits and pieces. And it found kind of genuine, there was, I think, like, on the original HoneyPOC, there was like 2 or 3 genuine insider threats where people had downloaded the SIGRED fake POC and pointed at internal hosts. And as a result, I'd gotten source IP addresses from inside of companies which I never thought I'd be inside, which is pretty terrifying, actually. So, roll forward, so this was in July last year, roll forward to around about April this year, and 2 vulnerabilities came out, not related to each other, and I was just chatting to one of my friends, and he was like, you should go and make one for these. So I made a second proof of concept, fake proof of concept, HoneyPoC, for the Pulse Secure. There was a remote code execution affecting that, and also the Microsoft Exchange bugs. So there was like tons of Exchange bugs that came out in April, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to create another fake POC, but it's only going to be a binary this time. And that got me blocked by quite a lot of people on Twitter. So this tweet here is me subtweeting a threat intelligence feed called vfeed.io. They've blocked me on Twitter, don't really care. They're named multiple times in this, and they were like, oh, check out this legitimate POC, blah, 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 it's new, And Kevin Beaumont kind of waded in and went, right, why don't we automate this? This will be a lot of fun. So basically, anyone who's watching this, blame Kevin Beaumont. It's not my fault, right? Sorry, Kevin. That's when AutoPOC was born. So what is AutoPOC? AutoPOC is disinformation as a service. What it does essentially, now if you can't read out the back, essentially what it does is it polls for the latest CVEs from a URL. The URL being like MITRE. So MITRE released CVEs for vulnerabilities affecting lots of different systems. And it does that, it collects the CVE ID, so like CVE 2021 leaked. It will then create a Git repository for that, so just a shell repository, so and then builds the POC from templates, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then once it's done that, it kind of starts the disinformation campaign. So what the disinformation campaign does is it posts the GitHub link to Pastebin, GoSpin, Twitter, and a couple of other sites. And the reason I picked those sites in particular was because what I was noticing from the first POC was the source traffic for a lot of threat intelligence companies was going to those specific sites. So I picked those to try and flood feeds. Once that was all built, it would then send me an email alert to honeypoc.io, which is the domain I bought specifically for this. And then fun would ensue. So templating for maximum reach. When I started building this, bit of a side topic, but Aidan, one of my good friends, was teaching me Russian. Don't know any Russian. I only know suka. It's a swear word, so yeah, you can count that as a swear word. You can look it up. I'm not gonna translate it. But we got talking about Python and Go, and he's like, why don't you just automate this and make templates? So I got kind of, we were up to like 3 or 4 in the morning making templates for what AutoPOC became. And essentially what the templates do is they are find and replace documents. So there's a Go template, there's a Unix template, and there's a README template. Now what the Go binary does, or the template, is it pulls the CVE ID, it pulls a canary token ID, so kind of scroll back, so go back a bit. I spoke to Thanks Canary. I was like, you guys have got an open source solution. I want to use it for automated at mass scale. And they went, no, that doesn't work. And I was like, okay, cool. What can I do to kind of make this better? And they went, how about we give you paid access to our kind of dashboard and things? You can generate as many POCs as you want. And spoiler alert, they didn't think I was going to generate over 5,000. They were like, oh, maybe a couple of hundred. It shouldn't be too bad. But the numbers are later on. But I generated quite a lot. So what I would do is I'd generate a unique URL. I would then pack it into the binary, build the binary, and do a lot of collection information. The Unix template, so this would build an exe, and the exe would go onto the Git repository. So you can't really check the source of that, but it's a raw binary on GitHub. You shouldn't be running raw binaries in GitHub. It wasn't like it was a release. The source code wasn't released. It was just up there. The second template was a Unix, just a bash script, which essentially made a curl request with the -A flag. That capital A means you can set the user agent. Now, what the user agent was set to was the host name, so the host parameter. So it would send that to the URL, and I'd get information about the host names. And then finally was the README, which is kind of where the disinformation aspect of things was. In the README, it had the CVE ID, the title, the description about what the CVE actually was. So people who were trolling GitHub and Pastebin and things, it was pulling all that information together and putting it into one place. What it also had, because everyone in threat intelligence and blue team, they love to check hashes of things, it would on the fly do a SHA-256 hash of the binary, because obviously it's a legitimate binary, like they're going to check it, it'll be fine. And it would drop it in, and as a result, that was showing up in a lot of threat intelligence feed. So that's how templates work. Who was it actually designed for? So originally, the original POC was a bit of a joke, a bit of a troll to fuck with people and do a bit of pieces. Yeah, okay, I swore once, right? And it was designed to poison threat intelligence feeds because most people, if hands up who does threat intelligence? There's like 3 people. Keep your hand up if you don't use Excel. Yeah, so basically, threat intelligence is Excel. And I just wanted to get into threat intelligence, get into the feeds. What I also wanted to do, because I was doing a lot of research from a red team perspective as to how threat actors picked up vulnerabilities and things, I wanted to try and poison threat actors' stuff, which, spoiler alert, not a good idea, because they've got a lot of money and they like calling people and things. But anyway, I'm not going to name any people in this talk because I've been told not to name people. I'll just name the threat intelligence feeds because I value my life. Anyway, it was also verifying the lack of verification where people would pull things through and just publish them. This is a prime example of a Chinese account that would pull from GitHub. They pointed out that this account was fake, and we'll talk about the accounts in a second. And it was designed to kind of tease script kiddies. This was one of the nicer Chinese messages I got. I got a lot of very threatening messages from people in Chinese, which was interesting. Where was it actually located? So I talked about GitHub a little bit. The process would upload to GitHub, and I created multiple GitHub accounts just to try and disperse and spread out the nonsense. I was going to say fuckery, but spread out the nonsense. Said fuckery anyway. So hey, it's one of these things, and it was just distributed chaos essentially. And then once that was done, it goes to Pastebin and then Twitter. But one of the things I learned from the original HoneyPOC was I became the man who cried POC. So every time I put something out, I was like, oh, it's a HoneyPOC. So I decided to create fake Twitter accounts to push this out because everybody loves a bit of misinformation. Got me a lot of hate from some government agencies, but we won't get into that. The actual timeline of events. So we've sort of touched on this already. HoneyPOC started in July last year. Around about April, these 2 CVEs were made up and a bit of fun. And then the auto campaign ran for about 6 to 8 months. And we're all here to see the kind of beautiful data and the kind of output of things. So in total, there were just about 5,000 canaries and CVEs generated. And from that was across multiple GitHub accounts, and there's a table later on that kind of breaks it down. But that was polling. So AutoPOC went through a lot of different stages. It started off where I was just polling for specific CVEs around Microsoft that had a CVSS score of like 10. And there wasn't that many of them, so then I started to pull it back to 8 to 10. And I mean, everyone loves CVSS, so I was like, you know what, fuck it. All of the CVSS just for Windows. And then what I found was the information I was getting quite a lot of data, but I wanted to go one step further. So I went one step further and I went, right, okay, I'm going to just go for everything. So I went for all CVEs between CVSS 5 and CVSS 10, so in actual real terms, a medium to a critical, and built proofs of concept for that. And out of all the data, there were 6,641 unique IP addresses. So that's 6,641 people. And that number is also so that number doesn't include sandboxes. If you include sandboxes, it's around about 70 or 80,000 IPs that are unique. But what I was finding with a lot of sandbox software is that they would generate they generate an IP on the fly, use it for analysis once, and then bin it. So as a result, you would get a lot of false positives because it was one IP and multiple instances were coming from multiple IPs. It's kind of good because you can't put them on a deny list, etc. And the project ran for 6 months. This is the kind of data I got. So again, another nice blockage. As you can see again, the states are at the top. What I found, so just a kind of disclaimer, this is a graph of all of the source IP addresses. I haven't mapped out the targets because there was a lot of them, and some of if you were to look, if I was to put them up here, you'd be able to identify some of the companies, and obviously that's not great. I've got a blog post that will be coming out soon. I think it comes out in like 20 minutes, so you can go and read about it afterwards. It doesn't list the target IPs either, but I might still do a blog post about it because it's quite interesting. But anyway, this has also been depruned from sandbox information, but it's not been depruned from like VPN and Tor. So there's quite a lot of information coming from hosting where people were spinning up VPSs, so like EC2 instances, whatever Azure use and whatever GCP use, and just chucking it into kind of a pot of chaos and pointing things at things. Technical. It's all good. And that was really, really popular. Up top left here, we've got top people using GCP, then people using AWS, then China, and then I don't know what that ASN is, but I found it multiple times listed, and then China again, because everybody loves China. And then the cities we've got, kind of random. I'm not 100% certain how IP info, which is what this dashboard is from, pulls their geographic locations, because it might not be accurate, but it's a kind of rough idea. And then there's a bit of information there. This will all be in the blog post, so don't worry about photographing and stuff. It's not a problem. So by generating the proofs of concept, I kind of bit off a little bit more than I could chew. So what I was talking about earlier on was when I was building AutoPOC, it was kind of incrementally getting a bit more sketchy. It's probably the best word for it. So initially, the binary was built to just call out to a URL, and that was it. It would take the source IP and it would get the geographic information about the host. But then, from speaking to people, I was like, right, okay, I'll get the host name, and then I'll get the username, and then I'll get the fully qualified domain name, and then I'll get the environmental path, and then I'll get the environmental variables, and then I'll get a little bit more information. So it was slowly becoming malware without it being malware. And I had a discussion with someone about this, and they went, technically it's not malware because it's the intent. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool, I'll go with that, that's fine. So yeah. On the left-hand side here is some of the ridiculous information I got from people running these binaries. I got Git tokens for some intelligence agencies, foreign intelligence agencies, not the UK. I know the NCSC might be in the room. I'm not a criminal, guys. I've got ethics somewhere. But I found a lot of internal domain names as well. And I'll talk about this later on because this is how I found insider threats. As a result of that, I also found Intel username formats. Now, when we do red teams and blue teams and all that sort of stuff, one of the things we do in reconnaissance is we try and find out what the username format is so that we can phish people, social engineer them, and target them. And what I found was a lot of companies will either use the first letter of their company name. So if we're using B size, it would be B, and then they'll use a random 6-character number. So B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 might be a username. And in my head, I was like, well, that doesn't match up to the email format because the email format's usually first dot last, or first last, or last first, etc. And it was really interesting to see what different companies did because I could map the internal domain name to the internal username and start to work out quite quickly. So all this data I was collecting, I got about, I think it was 228 gigabyte JSON files, right? So a JSON file is usually, 100 kilobits, talking gigabytes of data. It's quite a lot of data, quite scary. What I also found was, because I was capturing stuff in headers, I was also getting information about internal tooling. So I found, from my HoneyPOC data, I found that there was actually internal HoneyPOC data because it was appending a header being like, this is HoneyPOC X, doing Y. And I was identifying internal tooling as a result. There was a lot of other mental interesting stuff. I'm not going to talk about that too much because I've written a 6,000 word blog post about it and you can go and read about it. On the kind of left-hand side, you're right, my left. Anyway, these are the kind of host names I found from VirusTotal. So anyone who uploads a document or a binary or whatever to VirusTotal, if you ever upload Cobalt Strike and you see beacons from these host names, it's probably come from VirusTotal. The reason I know this is because there are a couple of indicators of compromise on VirusTotal. The first one is a random host name, which is going to be win followed by like a bunch of characters. The second one is just a single username, and the third one is usually host names. There's a fourth IOC if it's been uploaded to the kind of premium VirusTotal. What I managed to differentiate between VirusTotal was VirusTotal Enterprise has a different user agent to standard VirusTotal, but this isn't a talk about profiling VirusTotal. This is just information I observed. So, talking about kind of OS execution, most of the information I was gathering was around Windows endpoints. So, as you can see, quite a large proportion was on Windows. The kind of other split there is quite interesting. So the middle one there is kind of anyone who ran the Unix space, so the Mac and Linux and Unix hosts. There was about 23%. The unknown OS is quite interesting. What I was finding was sandboxes and blue teams and things were taking my binaries, ripping them apart and dropping the URLs into random things. So as a result, I was getting really interesting user agents which weren't mapped to any host name. Like, for example, I'm pretty sure it's a troll, but I found Red Star OS from North Korea, which was running these things. I'm like, pretty sure that can't even run Go, let alone like whatever. But so it was pretty interesting. But this was all based off of like the path variables and bits and pieces. So I had a map of the original HoneyPoC. This is the kind of geographic information from AutoPOC. So this is from all the POCs collectively. There were a total of 97 countries, 660 cities, spread across 6 continents. This is them mapped out. So quite quickly, you can see that Europe's a bit of a hotspot, America's a bit of a hotspot, and over around about China's a bit of a hotspot. There was a little bit throughout Russia. You can't see it, but there was one in the Arctic Circle. I'm not 100% sure who's running proofs of concept in Antarctica, but who knows? It was pretty interesting. So, seeing it visually, decided to make a bar graph, because everyone loves a bar graph. As we can see here, China, number 1, followed by United States, Germany, Japan, India, Hong Kong, Netherlands, graphed off, South Korea. There were, in total, from the IP space that I could see, around about 15, 20 hosts coming out of what looked like North Korea, but North Korea don't have their proper IP space from what I could see, so it's pretty interesting. People could correct me on that, but that's what I found. The interesting ASNs and sources, so the kind of IP blocks, there was a lot of China backbone, be it targeting Chinese companies or American companies or whatever. I wasn't 100% sure if these were threat actors, researchers, or a bit of everything. There was a commercial bank in there in Thailand, and I tried to get in contact with them, and they didn't contact me back, but hey. This is what I was talking about earlier on. The user agent there is for Red Star OS, which is North Korea's operating system, and they use that for they just use it. And then, surprise, surprise, Russia. There was the Federal Guard Service of the Russian Federation in there, which is the KGB. Well, it's scary. Some more graphs. So the kind of distribution of execution, this is purely based on the Windows hosts. I've broken it up into kind of 4 main categories. The first one is threat intelligence, because you're not very intelligent if you're running binaries, Sorry for the threat intelligence researchers in the room. This is companies trawling through Git or sharing things that they'd found on the dark net or Pastebin or whatever. And these were based on IP, based on hostname, based on lots of bits and pieces. The only advice I'm going to give you in this talk, I'll give you a lot of advice, but is if you're doing threat intelligence or malware research, don't run it on your host machine. Don't run it on your corporate domain against your corporate hosts. And if you're going to do that, don't give it outbound internet access, because that's just asking for a bad time. So when I launched HoneyPOC, what happened was there were multiple kind of malicious POCs that were released, not by myself, but by actual threat actors. And there were some fake proofs of concept for certain vulnerabilities released that had Cobalt Strike packed into them. People were downloading them, running them anyway, and I'm like, guys, come on, we've been through this. So anyway, the other split here was kind of opportunistic hackers. So the script folks, they run random CVEs, they point them at things, and they hope they're vulnerable. And what I found from that which was pretty interesting, is because they were downloading these and pointing them at hosts, there was a lot of bug bounties in there. And they were pointing them at hosts that were actually vulnerable. So I was going away and, suppose this is the bit of grey ethic, I was going away and getting the actual exploits for these things and pointing them at the bug bounty programs and making a little bit of cash inside as a result of that. So, click shit, get hit, basically. The other split here is the insider threat. So there was a very small percentage of genuine insider threat where people were either perceived idiots downloading things and running them, or actually malicious downloading things and running them and pointing them at hosts. And then there was other uncategorized traffic. And it's uncategorized because I'm not really sure where to put it, because I'm not sure if it was sandbox traffic or if it was genuine researchers or if it was security companies or people trolling, because don't feed the trolls, just troll them back. The other kind of information I got, so we talked a lot about IP addresses earlier on. There were 357 unique ASNs. This whole campaign was spread across 8, technically 9 accounts, but 8 accounts of them had content on them. The 9th account was HoneyPOC, which mysteriously got immediately blacklisted by GitHub. GitHub would just flag that shit, and it got kicked off GitHub, which was really weird. I'm not sure if somebody flagged it or if it was just immediately picked up by kind of AI or whatever. The number down there is the unique executions on Windows hosts. So there was 19,461 unique executions on Windows hosts from 6,000 odd IP addresses. So that's quite a lot of people downloading stuff and running it. This table here didn't come out so well, but this is on the blog post. This is the distribution across GitHub accounts. So at the time that this was taken, the kind of top ones had different POCs. Now this doesn't add up to the 5,000 because they were split across and multiple CVE links were generated. So in the first instance, what I was doing was generating one canary token per campaign. So like CVE 2020 1, 2, 3, 4 would have one URL. But what I was doing later on was actually like, I want to work out what the ones are Unix hosts. I want to work out what's Windows. So I was generating a URL per binary or per template. So as a result, there was 2 for the README, because there was a click through this link to find out about the CVE, which had a canary redirect. There was download this request, and it will rickroll you, but it will also take you to the canary token. And then there was the binary that had 2 callouts. The first callout was just purely on execution, which was to check that it was running a bit like malware, I suppose. And the second one was to gather information about the hostname, username, fully qualified domain name, DNS name, path variables, and environmental variables. So a lot of data. What I didn't talk about in the framework is this data wasn't just being sent out. What I was doing with the data, and I found bypasses for DLP solutions as a result of this, it would take all the data and chunk it into a block of text. It would reverse the text, hex encode it, and then base 32 encode it. Not encrypted, just encoded. And then chuck it through whatever proxies. And as a result, it was getting through things. And having spoken to a couple of companies about this, that was, and still is for some things, a valid bypass for data loss prevention. So, if anyone's malicious in the audience and at home, you can get stuff out of networks by using base 32 and hex. And if there's defenders in the audience, look for base 32. People use base 64 much more often than they use base 32. The base 32 is still a valid encoding mechanism. So, pretty interesting. One of the things that got requested quite a lot when I was polling this on Twitter was the kind of CVE spread. So what was the kind of most interesting CVEs? Those at the back who can't really see, I mean, the brown on brown's a really bad choice, I apologise. The kind of top 3 up there is the HoneyPOC 1, 2, and 3. So the 2020 1350 is HoneyPOC 1. This is after I start, so this is from April rather than the initial executions. And this is from one repository that I uploaded them to. So I uploaded them all to one place just to see how many hits they got. In terms of CVEs, hopefully, I mean, if there's people in the audience who have got like Rain Man-like characteristics where they can see a CVE and know what OS it affects, to give the people that aren't like that in the audience a bit of an insight, all of these, bar about 3 of them, affect kind of what I classify as third-party applications, so not first-party operating system applications. Most of them either affect things like Confluence, Jira, VPN solutions. There's things like Elasticsearch that affect in there. I mean, there are CVEs for everything. The 2020 1350 affects Windows, and there's a few other ones that affect Windows in there. The kind of interesting stuff. So the insider threat aspect of stuff, there were a few. When I was making these slides, I was chatting to a lot of people about a lot of things. And one of the things that people were like, oh, you should name all the companies, just name and shame. And I was going to do that, but then I was like, it's probably not a good idea because there's some interesting companies in here, and because of that, my sanity prevailed. So from the kind of companies that I contacted, there were 2 airlines, 1 bank, 2 threat intelligence companies, and 1 video games vendor, which ran the POCs against legitimate hosts internally. And the reason I was able to identify them was based on the IP address and the target that they were pointing at. So what the binaries would do is they would collect the target IP or target host name that you're pointing at, and it would append that to a header which was x-target-IP. All of the detection response, all the detection response information will be in the blog. So I've written YAROs. There's a YARO at the end of this, how to detect it, all the different bits and pieces. So don't worry, it's not just here's shit, whatever. There's also a ton of other random companies that I contacted in lots of different industries, which we'll talk about later on, who didn't reply to my email. So these are the only people that replied to me, who were like, yep, we acknowledge that this was run inside our environment. Thanks for letting us know. One of the companies in here actually triggered an instant response. So what I'd actually identified was, I think it was like a Monday afternoon, I'd got a ping back to my host, and I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So I happened to know somebody who worked at the company. I was like, yo, this has happened. Pretty sure this shouldn't be happening. Do you want to maybe look into this? And they got back in touch with me and went, that's pretty bad. Yeah, you've just spotted what is a legitimate insider threat. We've been breached. I'm like, oh, cool. That's cool. That's your problem now. I'll let you deal with that. So it's pretty fun. There was a lot of hate, a lot of fails in this. So this is where I'm naming and shaming people, right? So there were 3 feeds in this that named me as a legitimate POC. McAfee, take from that what you will. Vulmon and VFeed.io. VFeed.io blocked me on Twitter because they got a little bit upset that they were being told that when they tweet stuff out that says, this is a legitimate POC, it's come out, blah, blah, blah. It's not legitimate. They weren't checking things, it was just automated. And even after being told by myself, Kevin Beaumont, a bunch of other people, this is fake, by the way, don't list it in your feed, they ignored me and just blocked me anyway, because threat intelligence, what's that? Down the bottom here, I've kind of censored the people's accounts out because I don't want people to look them up. I mean, you can find the tweets if you want, but there were internal intelligence teams who'd reported the CVEs as legitimate. Like, oh, look at this POC, it's come out. So that was a bit of fun. The feeds kind of continued. So this is a screenshot of McAfee listing the original HoneyPOC. Tim's talk, which is in track 2 at the moment, replying and being like, this is fake, by the way, it's not legitimate. I believe this guy is actually at B-side, so I do apologise for naming and shaming you in the talk. This down here, this tweet's been deleted, but essentially what happened was somebody took the original HoneyPOC round about, I want to say January this year, and chucked it on NetSec, so on /r/NetSec on Reddit. And there's a lot of bots that automatically poll Reddit, and as a result, they push them out to Twitter. A lot of big companies, Raytheon here an example, person doesn't work at Raytheon anymore, and the tweet's been deleted, so you can't find it. They were like, oh yeah, this is legitimate. So this got 100 retweets really quickly because this person had loads of followers. I was like, oh, this is going to get quite fun. A lot of people ran it. So talking about the kind of insider threat stuff, I'm not naming the companies because I value my life. There was a lot of ICS, industrial control systems companies, because I think there was 2 or 3 CVEs that I put out POCs for affected industrial control systems. So as a result, people who worked for those companies would run them. So there was a water filtration plant in the Middle East that ran this, just no bother. We've all heard of Stuxnet. That went down really well. Wasn't me, by the way, just to clarify. There was a couple of foreign intelligence. I've scored out intelligence there. There was espionage basically going on. There was, what I could see, threat actors targeting other countries. There was a games company there. There was a lot of security companies. Now, I say security companies because there's a lot of companies, both in the UK and the US, that have their own IP ranges that say, this belongs to this company. I'm like, all right, yeah, cool. Look up the company. I'm like, they were a consultancy. I'm pretty sure they shouldn't be running this. And it turned out they were running them on client engagements from their VPNs. Not going to name them, but there were some UK consultancies in there. So take from that what you will. There was also several financial companies. Now, I say financial companies because there were 2 banks. There were a large portfolio company, so management, and a couple of other fintech companies that were running things. Now that could have been people trying it in a lab, but I was still getting ping back, so it was pretty interesting. Some people got upset, as you can imagine. VFeed blocked me. Someone tweeted this out at the start of October, and I've scored the name out, but they were really happy about all the POCs that I was flooding to Twitter. And what I did there was I wrote a script to essentially change the Git URL each time. So as a result, then somebody on one of the POCs opened an issue. I'm like, can you please take this down? I can't patch it, which is quite nice. But they also called me an asshole, so I decided to name and shame them. I haven't scored out the names, so you can go and look them on GitHub and give them shit. The upset continued. So some of my friends got a little bit upset as well. When I initially released the POC, one of my mates was like, what have you done now? I was like, I've got a great idea of what I made. He's like, oh, what have you done? I was like, oh, okay. Then they became war crimes. Just to clarify, these 2 screenshots on the left are different conversations with different people. Morgan, she was really upset at me and removed me from the group chat. She was like, right, that's it. Andy's not in here. Fuck this. And I got added in later on, 20 minutes later, I got added back in. I got put on the naughty step. This here, I have actually had to snip off the end of it because it actually names the company involved. But this was a threat intelligence company working with a government agency in the States, being like, oh, we saw this legitimate POC. Why have you not told us about it? He was like, because it's fake. They're like, no, you should definitely go and check it out. And then he was really upset with me, and I haven't taken the tweet because he deleted the tweet, but it was pretty interesting. So that was the upset. Detection and identification. So there are arguments on Twitter all of the time about lots of different things. There's an argument going on at the moment about if using 0 days in red teams is ethical. Not going to comment on that today. But one of the things I wanted to do in this talk was talk a lot about detection and identification, because while showing you all the data is really interesting, actually detecting it in your environment retrospectively and retroactively, basically after the fact. Words are hard, all right? I wrote a YARA rule, so I'm not a blue teamer by trade. My colleague Anton, who works in our purple team at Laris, helped me write this YARA rule. What this YARA rule does is it detects the URLs that were used in the POCs. Now, it's worth caveating this. If you use Thinks Canary, take out line 2, because canarytokens.com is legitimate, or it can be legitimate. So that might flag up false positives, but it's just a bit of help. That URL will be displayed at the end. Talk about it in a minute. These are all the domains and patterns and things that were used throughout the campaigns. So these are all minus the HoneyPOC account, because it didn't have anything hosted on it. These are all the GitHub accounts. They'll be in the blog post, so you can read about them afterwards, that were used in the campaign. So the kind of, is this going to, oh, shit. Wait, hold on. There we go. So Google Project Zero. That's pretty cool. I didn't realize it did that. Technology's hard, folks. So I use Google Project Zero because Google like to release POCs and kind of, when like pointing them at companies, I thought, that'd be a really good idea. I got a takedown notice from Google Project Zero being like, take those accounts down, which is pretty cool. I got a couple of letters from people being like, can you not do this? So as a result, stopped doing it. Example of the pastebin here. So this link here, I'm not sure if it's live anymore. Obviously don't click on links that Andy sends you. We've learned this from this talk, hopefully. That's an example of what the disinformation campaign looks like on Pastebin and Ghostbin and other sites. I've written a separate YARA rule for detection of that, but templated. So you can look through your DNS logs, you can look through your HTTP logs and things like that, and identify, possibly retroactively, if there have been instances of HoneyPOC in your estate that you might not know about. Equally, I might not have contacted you because I might not be able to identify you from IP address, which I suppose is good from an OPSEC perspective, but also, yeah. Some water. And then at the bottom down here, we've got the 2 domains that were used. So the first one's a little bit self-explanatory. HoneyPOC.io. The actual subdomain was CVE.honeypoc.io, but there are other ones that were used in earlier campaigns. The second one's a bit of fun. So bit of an off-topic sidetrack, but a couple of mates and I were on a call one night, and they were like, I'm never clicking a link from Andy, because it's always like, give me your passwords.ninja or something. I was like, oh, that's a domain that's available. I'm going to buy that and use that for HoneyPOC. So as a result, I did. And one of the things that, kind of, I should have said at the start, this talk isn't sponsored by anyone. I'm just here myself speaking of things, but Thinks Canary gave me a lot of information. So they didn't sponsor it directly, but they gave me access to things. What you can do with their platform is you can have any subdomain. So I was looking through all the things that we use in red teams, and I found that docs.whatever tend to slip under the radar because people go and read the docs for things developers do. So as a result, I set the subdomain to docs.givemeyourpasswords.ninja. Now, docs.givemeyourpasswords.ninja isn't that kind of subtle, is it? So, it's one of these things. The lasting impact of this campaign. So, I got a lot of accounts flagged on GitHub. The 8 that are listed there is the 8 that are actually successful. In actual fact, there are about 210 GitHub accounts that I created because I managed to script it using Selenium to create them automatically. The kind of insider threats that were caught or thwarted, there were 6 companies, 2 of which were FTSE 500 companies, so pretty high-profile companies. And they were running these things blindly. Almost dropped that, that'd be really bad. What it also did is it raised general awareness to these techniques and malicious campaigns. And it caught malicious threat actors instead of networks too, which was pretty interesting. When I was putting the talk together, I asked a lot of people in various intel sharing groups. And one of the things that came up was kind of, we'd like to know what the time to execute was. I keep thinking I'm clicking this, but it's the screen moving about. The average time to execute was about an hour upon release to someone executing it. I say payload here, but it was a fake POC on an endpoint. The large amount of interest was mostly from Russia and China, and they tend to be the 2 kind of threat actors. But what I found was some accounts were automatically indexing GitHub, and as soon as something that mentioned a CVE was released, they would download it, run it, and point it at domains. But they were pointing at domains blindly. Like I found things that were like really strange, like myperfectgroceries.cn. Don't know why, but that's an example. It was really interesting. So what I also found off the back of this, which isn't in the slide deck, but I found accidentally front companies of threat actors. So companies that have been set up to act as a like legitimate front. So Joe's Ramen, for example, was actually the fucking Chinese National Guard. That's an example, but that kind of stuff, it was pretty interesting. And I was like, oh, this is a bit strange. So that's when I kind of took my foot off the accelerator. I went, I'm just going to stop there and hope for the best. So that was the lasting impact. Now, before I finish this off, there's a couple of people I need to thank. The first one is Sticks. So Sticks took my code that was one big Python script and made it into a modular and extensible framework. So I'm not going to release the framework because releasing it is actually probably pretty dangerous, because what the framework enables you to do is point it at a Canary token IP or any IP, and it will generate URLs, it will generate CVEs, and it will post them to GitHub accounts automatically. What I did was I took Stix's code and made it a little bit more automated in that it would pull, so it would create a GitHub account, it would post an individual CVE to that GitHub account, and then it would also post some other stuff to that to keep it like in line. As you can imagine, pretty fucking dangerous. Aidan taught me a lot about templating. As I said earlier on, we were chatting about Russian, and then we got very deep into building stuff in Python. Thanks Canary. They gave me access originally to canarytokens.org, which is free. You should go and check it out. But then they gave me access to their paid console, and their paid console is fantastic. And this isn't me corporate shilling or whatever, but it's genuinely the best thing I've come across in terms of HoneyPoC software inside of networks. Like, I do a lot of red team engagements, and there are certain vendors that you can spot their honeypots in their networks based on the kind of profile and fingerprint inside the network. However, what I found with Things Canary is it's very difficult to detect because it looks like a Windows 10 machine, or in some instances where companies don't really care, they make it an XP machine. You're like, that's an XP machine, a Windows 10 estate, which you do see now and again, but it's pretty difficult to detect. Kevin Beaumont wanted to thank as well. He couldn't make it down because he forgot his B-sides this weekend, but he's kind of the one to blame for the reason it got automated, because he was like, oh, this is a good idea, and then he started chatting to me about things, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And then got ipinfo.io, so all the pretty dashboards and stuff that I had up, they actually started building this in, I think it was like April, when I got in contact with them. I was like, I'm using your service for mapping out IP addresses. This is what I've built. It'd be cool if you could do this en masse. They went, oh, that's a good idea. So they built an IP mapping tool and a summarization tool. So the dashboard with all the graphs and things is their summarization tool, and the map with all the dots and things is their mapping tool. Now, that's free. You can go and use that. If you go to ipinfo.io, you can chuck in up to 500,000 IP addresses, and it will map them out for you, or it will summarize them. It'll find the ASNs, it'll find the geographic locations based on the kind of longitude, latitude, and all that sort of stuff. And it's pretty interesting in general. Finally, got Morgan to thank. She talked me out of a lot of things. I didn't get disappeared by foreign intelligence services because I didn't name them, because that was something that suggested. And then before I kind of finish off, if you want to give that a quick scan, that'd be great. As of, just double check the time. As of right now, 3 minutes ago, that blog post is live. So if you go to blog.zsite.uk, there's a tweet that's gone out right now as well. Didn't tweet while on stage, I scheduled it, or at least I hope I scheduled it for the right time. That's got all the data from things, so you can go and follow me on Twitter. The other blog posts are under the HoneyPoC tag. I've left intentionally a couple of minutes for questions because I imagine there'll be a few. So thanks for coming along. Thanks for watching at home, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Has anyone got any questions?
Thanks, Andy.